My name is Claire Beasley, and I was walking into our kitchen in Denver, Colorado, when my husband, Eric, said, "Claire, you're becoming an embarrassment," without looking up from his laptop. The words hit me like a physical blow, especially after the day I'd had at Sundale Financial, where I worked as a senior investment advisor, and where I'd just closed a major client deal worth over $2 million. Rather than celebrating, I was entering another evening of criticism. I've been married to Eric, a corporate lawyer who worked for one of Denver's most prominent law firms, for the past 18 years. We lived in a lovely home in Cherry Creek, and although everything seemed to be falling apart on the outside, the past year has been the most difficult of my life. My father died in March after a protracted fight with cancer, and I've been finding it difficult to deal with the loss. "I had a great day at work today," I said quietly, trying to change the subject. "To the Morrison account. Nobody cares about your little victories when you can barely function as a wife," Eric interrupted, his voice dripping with concern. "I had a great day at work today," I said, adding that the wine I'd been having with dinner had gradually become a way to numb the pain while maintaining my demanding career. Contempt. "Look at yourself. Look at this kitchen." His remarks hurt, because there was just enough truth in them to make me question myself. I had been drinking more, and I had been finding it difficult to keep up with everything. I looked around the kitchen, which was obviously messy from the morning rush, and then down at my work clothes, which were wrinkled from a long day. "I'm doing my best here, Eric." His choice of words, unstable, seemed like such a calculated term, not something someone would say in the heat of an argument. But before I could fully process that feeling, Eric's phone rang, and he said, "I need you. This year, you've been trying your hardest." And he laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Your best is pathetic, Claire, and you're becoming unstable. And honestly, I'm tired of covering for you," he said. "Try not to embarrass yourself anymore tonight." As he walked into his home office, the silence of the house pressed against me as he vanished down the hallway, leaving me feeling smaller than I had in years. I started to reach for the wine bottle on the counter, but something stopped me, possibly because of what Eric had said. Eric had already left for work, which was unusual, but as I reached to get his coffee mug, I noticed that he had left it on the nightstand rather than taking it to the kitchen. I put the bottle back and poured myself a glass of water instead, little realizing that this simple choice would change everything. The following morning, I woke up with a clearer head than I'd had in months. My heart stopped when I noticed that it was a voice recorder hidden behind the lamp base. I stared at the small device for what seemed like hours, but was probably just seconds. My hands trembled as I carefully examined it, without moving it from its position, and the red light showed that it was actively recording. Suddenly, every conversation we had recently took on a new meaning. I left the recorder exactly where it was, and went downstairs to make breakfast, because my mind was racing. And I knew that if Eric was secretly recording me, there had to be a reason why he had pushed me toward that wine bottle, gotten me into arguments, and accused me of being too emotional or irrational. It wasn't out of concern for my welfare. I had been a successful financial advisor for over 15 years, so I knew how to analyze situations, gather data, and make strategic decisions. If Eric was playing a game, I needed to understand the rules before I could figure out how to win that. Eric came home with flowers, something he hadn't done in a long time. Unstable from the previous night echoed in my head over breakfast. Was he constructing a case against me? Presenting them with a smile that stopped short of his eyes, he said, "I'm sorry about last night," adding, "I know you're going through a difficult time with your father's passing. Maybe we should talk to someone about getting you some help," I asked, putting the flowers in a vase. "Just someone to talk to about the drinking and about your emotional..." "I'm worried about you, Claire." Seemed intended to set up a story, so I nodded and, "Perhaps you're right, but let me consider." That evening, while Eric was working late in his office, I overheard him on the phone. Our house's walls weren't very thick, and his voice carried more than he likely realized. "She's getting worse," yes, saying that she could hardly carry on a conversation without slurring her. I drew closer to the office. The word baby hit me like a... Eric was talking to another woman about recordings, about filing something, and I backed away from the door as the pieces of a terrible puzzle began to fall into... I knew that my husband wasn't just recording me. He was planning my downfall. My heart was... "I know, baby, but we have to be patient. The recordings are building a solid case. By the time I file, she won't be able to claim anything." The fact that my husband was actively trying to ruin me should have sent me into a tailspin, but instead, it gave me a sense of purpose that I hadn't had in months. Eric believed he was dealing with a broken woman who would break under pressure, but he was going to realize how mistaken he was. The following morning, I called in sick to work, something I didn't do very often, and spent the day. My first stop was the electronics store in downtown Denver, where I bought a small security camera system and several discrete recording devices. The sales clerk, a young man who appeared to know his way around surveillance, told me about hidden cameras, voice-activated recording devices, and digital surveillance equipment. If Eric wanted to play the evidence game, I would show him how it was really done. He explained, "You want these where there's natural conversation but not obvious snooping," adding that kitchen islands, coffee tables, anywhere people naturally gather and talk, are good places. The device provided me crash training in location and retrieval. By the time Eric got home that night, I had turned our house into a monitoring network, with voice recorders in his office and car, hidden cameras in the kitchen and living room, and I kept up the appearance of the grieving, struggling wife Eric expected to see over the course of the following week. I poured wine at dinner, but hardly touched it. I appeared preoccupied and emotional during our conversations. I played the part he needed me to play, while my devices recorded every moment of his performance. I had backup devices in places he'd never consider to check if he was recording me. I was in our bedroom listening through the baby monitor I had repurposed to hear what was going on in his office on a Thursday night. I had discovered that his mistress, Victoria, who worked at his law firm, had come over for what Eric believed to be a private meeting. This worthless drunk won't get a penny, and I could hear Victoria laughing back, saying she's too weak to. Please, I have hours of her slurring her words, crying, and acting completely unstable. No judge is going to award alimony to an alcoholic who can't take care of herself. What about her job? She makes good money, but not for long. And by the time I'm done with her, she'll be lucky if she can afford a studio apartment. Are you sure the recordings will hold up in court? Victoria asked. I heard them plot my total devastation with the disinterested fascination of someone watching a nature documentary about predators. They had no idea that they were being filmed and that every word of their conspiracy was being captured in crystal clear audio that night. Her firm received a few anonymous tips about her drinking problem, and they will begin questioning her judgment with client accounts. She will be fired within a month. I made a decision that would alter everything the following morning. Rather than continuing to gather evidence covertly, I chose to speed up Eric's timeline. If he wanted me to look unstable, I would give him exactly what he wanted, but on my terms. I began by calling Sunil Financial and talking to my supervisor, Helena Reynolds. Helena, I need to take some personal time, I said, making sure to sound a little shaky. Helena, who had been my mentor for years, became worried right away. I'm dealing with some family issues related to my father's estate, and I think I need a few weeks to get my head straight. Claire, are you okay? You've seemed stressed lately. I'm fine, I said, allowing a slight tremor to creep into my voice. I just need some time to figure things out. Eric believes it might be beneficial for me as well. Naturally, take as much time as you need. Your job will be here when you're ready. Now, Eric would believe that his strategy of isolating me professionally was successful, but I had actually protected myself by taking proactive leave. So instead of getting fired that night, I put on the show of my life. When Eric entered the room, I was in the kitchen holding a glass of wine, but it was actually grape juice mixed with... I dropped some water on my shirt and somewhat tangled my hair. What happened here, Claire? I had a bad day, I said, trying to sound a little slurred, because Eric asked, and I could hear the barely contained excitement in his voice. Helena believes that I need time off work. Perhaps she is correct. Perhaps everyone is correct about me. Eric drew nearer, and I could almost see him figuring out how this would play out in a divorce. The irony wasn't lost on me, but Eric took it all in stride. I just want what's best for you, Claire. Perhaps we should look into some treatment options. Court, honey, you seem upset. I called my sister today and continued improvising, telling her how you've been helping me deal with Dad's death. I let my voice break a little. You think I need help? You think I need treatment? And I'm going to make sure you get it. That night, after Eric went to bed, I downloaded all the recordings from my devices and started compiling them into a thorough file. What I discovered was even worse than I had anticipated. Eric had been methodically recording what he believed to be the contrast between his public persona as a concerned husband and his private cruelty was shocking. The following day, while Eric was at work, I made a phone call that would alter everything I had researched. I had spent months crafting a narrative of decline that began long before my father's death. But more importantly, I had captured his true voice, the cruel, cunning man who laughed about ruining his wife's life with his mistress. The professional voice of her assistant approached Mr. Moore's office. I would like to speak with Rachel Moore about a story involving legal fraud and domestic manipulation. I said in a steady and clear voice, Can I get your name and a brief description of the situation? Investigative journalists in the Denver area discovered Rachel Moore, who wrote for the Morning Ledger and specialized in stories about abuse of power and legal manipulation. I believe your readers would be very interested in how the legal system can be used as a weapon against innocent spouses. There was a pause. Please hold. Miss Moore will want to speak with you. My name is Claire Beasley, and my husband is a well-known lawyer who has been surreptitiously recording me and fabricating evidence to create a false case for divorce. I have recordings of him confessing to conspiracy and plotting to ruin my career. The next day we met at a small cafe downtown, far from anywhere Eric might happen to run into us. Rachel Moore was on the line 2 minutes later, and Mrs. Beasley told me everything. Rachel Moore was everything I had hoped for in an investigative journalist, sharp, skeptical, and completely unyielding when she sensed a genuine story. Before we could go any farther, Rachel said, taking out her own recorder. I need to make Rachel's eyebrows shot up as she said, It's obvious that everything you tell me will be independently verified. I don't publish. He said, Slying a USB drive across the table, I saw hours of audio and video recordings, financial documents demonstrating money being moved without my knowledge, and communications between my husband and his mistress detailing their entire plan. Pocketed the drive and said, Why are you coming to me rather than just using this in divorce court? It sounds almost too convenient. Eric isn't the only lawyer who has worked out how to manipulate the system. He's told Victoria about other instances, where he's employed similar strategies. Because this isn't just about my divorce, I added. This is a pattern of behavior that extends beyond a single marriage, and Victoria is according to my recordings, his mistress, Victoria Hriss, an associate at his firm, Bram Cove Holdings Legal Division, has been assisting him in researching strategies for manipulating evidence in divorce proceedings. They have discussed at least 3 other cases where similar tactics were employed, and Rachel was frantically taking notes. What kind of timeline are we looking at, and when is he planning to file? He wants me to have a public breakdown or do something that will make his accusations seem credible, but you won't give him that. Instead, you're going to give him something much worse, the truth. Over the course of the following week, Rachel worked incredibly efficiently, cross-referencing the financial documents with public records and verifying my recordings with audio experts. In the meantime, I kept doing my part at home. Eric's behavior had become more brazen. He no longer bothered to hide his disdain for me, likely because he believed I was too broken to notice or remember clearly. On Wednesday night, he brought Victoria to our house for dinner. He even managed to interview 2 other women who had divorced under suspicious circumstances with lawyers from Eric's firm. Took me by surprise, but I remained calm. You recall Victoria from the firm Christmas party last year? Eric said, As if this were a perfectly normal social visit, of course, I said, shaking Victoria's hand and noting how she avoided eye contact. It's so nice of you to come check on me. Eric's told you about my rough patch, Victoria said, looking at Eric anxiously. You've been going through a difficult time because of this. Oh, it's really hard sometimes. I don't even know why I let my voice carry just the right amount of fragility. It feels like someone is systematically destroying everything I care about, and I'm too dumb to realize how delicious the irony was. Victoria actually wriggled in her chair during dinner, and they relaxed more and more, probably thinking, As Victoria was leaving, Eric said, I think Claire's finally starting to understand that she needs help. Sometimes people have to hit rock bottom before they can accept reality, Victoria said. They were too damaged to pick up on their subtle communications and inside jokes, without realizing that every word was being recorded by 3 different devices I had strategically placed throughout the dining room. After she departed, Eric came to me in what I'm sure he believed to be a sympathetic manner, and said, Claire, I think it's time we had a serious conversation about getting you some professional help. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is to quit encouraging someone's destructive conduct. I answered, You're probably correct. Maybe it's time for me to confront the reality of my circumstance. I wasn't lying. The time for the truth had come. We're ready to publish on Sunday after the editors have reviewed everything. Our legal team has given their approval, and we have enough confirmation to make this bulletproof. Rachel called me Friday morning with news that made my heart race. Are you ready for what's ahead? Ready for what's ahead? I thought about the woman I'd been a month ago, grieving alone and doubting my own sanity as my husband and I asked, What do you mean? I had a pretty good idea that once this story breaks, your life will change drastically. Eric will know that you've been looking into him. His firm will probably come under scrutiny, and you'll be in the middle of a very public scandal. Are you ready for that level of attention? Methodically undermined my self-esteem, and then I considered the woman I was now, strategic, clear-headed, and completely done with being anyone's victim. I said, I'm ready. But I wanted to be ready for the headline. A local attorney caught on tape planning to frame wife as alcoholic in divorce scheme. We have sidebar stories about the other cases and an editorial about, this will be the front page above the fold for legal ethics reform. That weekend was amazing. Eric was feeling exceptionally upbeat, likely because he believed his plan was almost finished. He even proposed that we go out to dinner on Saturday night, something we hadn't done in months. You seem like you're feeling better, he said over dinner at a fancy restaurant downtown. More like, in what was likely the most honest thing I had said to him in weeks. I said, Your old self. I think I'm finally accepting reality. Sometimes the people who love us notice things about us that we are blind to. It was almost amazing how sincere his voice sounded. If I hadn't heard the tapes of him joking about ruining me, I genuinely thought he cared. Sunday morning came with a strange silence, and Eric was sleeping, which was unusual for him. I was getting up early to make coffee when my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. It was a live check of the Morning Ledger website, and when I opened my laptop, my story was featured on the front page of Denver's most popular newspaper. The headline was even more damning than Rachel had described, as it highlighted a well-known lawyer who had secretly recorded it. The article was devastating. Rachel had combined financial evidence, expert commentary, and audio recordings to paint Eric as a manipulative predator who had used the legal system against his own wife, rather than a concerned husband. The recordings of him laughing with Victoria about my alleged weakness were especially damning, but what truly broke my heart was how she constructed the story. I heard Eric's alarm go off upstairs and immediately shut down the laptop, but within minutes his phone began ringing. What the hell? I heard him yelling from the bedroom. How did they get this? Who gave them these? This was the sidebar story about the other women Rachel had discovered, and the paper was calling for an investigation into the entire practice. As I sipped my coffee quietly, I heard his footsteps thundering down the stairs. Eric then emerged, in the kitchen, still in his pajamas, holding his phone and looking very panicked. Claire, he said in a carefully controlled voice, we need to talk. I said, good morning to you too, honey. And he looked at me for a while. You seem upset. Bad news. I remarked cheerfully. And I was able to witness the precise moment he recognized that the damaged lady he had been controlling was no longer there. You did this? Did what? He answered quietly. I asked, steadfastly meeting his eyes. I'm just a worthless drunk, remember? Too weak to fight back. The following few hours transpired precisely as I had anticipated, even though he was no longer answering. Calls in front of me. Eric's phone continued to ring from reporters from his law firm, family members who had seen the story, and probably Victoria. You recorded me, he said, pacing our kitchen like a caged animal. You've been recording me this entire time. I gently remarked, interesting choice of words, as if you were familiar with the please explain to me how what I did was different from the idea of secret recordings. Eric justified the legal necessity, so I stood up and confronted him directly. You concealed recording devices in our bedroom, conspired with your mistress to ruin my career, and intended to take everything. I've worked for and leave me with nothing. My phone rang, and I answered it without taking my eyes off Eric. Hello, Mrs. Beasley. This is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. We'd like to interview you about the Morning Ledger story. Would you be available today? I said loudly enough for Eric to hear. Let me check my schedule and get back to you. The man who had made his living by fabricating arguments and manipulating language was stunned. His phone buzzed with a text, and I watched his face go white as he read it. My firm is placing me on administrative leave pending an investigation. He said quietly, That's unfortunate. To which I replied, I suppose they don't appreciate it. Eric's face had gone completely white. Claire, think about what you're doing. If this goes any further, it's going to destroy us both. You already destroyed us, Eric. By Tuesday, the story had taken on a life of its own. The Colorado Bar Association announced that they were opening an ethics investigation after 2 other women came forward with similar stories about Eric's firm, Victoria. These lawyers are fraudsters and conspirators who would have believed that they don't understand what you've done to my career, which is built on lies and manipulation. Yes, I believe I understand perfectly. Leave as well, and Rachel claimed that she was already searching for a new job outside of Denver. In the meantime, I had become somewhat of a folk hero, and I received a ton of messages from women who had experienced similar things, divorce lawyers offering to represent me, and reporters wishing to speak with me about legal abuse and domestic manipulation. I didn't miss the irony that Eric's plan to isolate and destroy me had instead brought me into contact with a community of I filed for divorce this morning, and my lawyer advised me to document all marital assets before you try to hide them. I held up a financial statement, and speaking of which, I found the account where you've been transferring our joint savings. Eric, who knew exactly what I had been through, came home to find me packing boxes in his office on Wednesday afternoon. What are you doing? He asked. I'm going to do this the legal way, without any covert recordings, manipulation, or conspiracy. Just facts and evidence presented in open court. Eric sank into a chair, looking more defeated than I've ever seen. Him. What do you want? I want what I've always wanted, Eric. Respect, honesty, and respect. Actually, we don't need lawyers, Claire. 6 months later, as I sat in my new apartment overlooking downtown Denver, I thought back on the journey that had brought me here. The divorce had been finalized in my favor. Eric's legal career was effectively over, and I had finally learned how strong I really was. Justice, I closed the box I was packing and looked at him directly. The difference is that now I'm going to get all 3. I returned to Sundale Financial with a raise, and the admiration of my co-workers, my retaliation, had been about truth rather than destruction, and truth had liberated me in ways I never thought possible.